There is a corner in Marion, Ohio, where West Center Street meets Leader Street, and for more than a century, that corner meant something. Foundry smoke, steam whistles, men walking home at shift change in numbers that no longer exist. Today, it is quiet. A person could stand there now and not know that this half-mile of ground once helped power American agriculture, from Ohio to the Rocky Mountains, and that the company built here, unlike almost every other name in this genre, didn't die in a single dramatic year. It didn't collapse. It dissolved, slowly, over more than a century, one product line at a time, until there was nothing left to call Huber but a name. That is the strange thing about this story. Every other fallen tractor brand has one death. Huber had three.
Edward Huber was born in 1837 on a farm in Dearborn County, Indiana. He apprenticed as a blacksmith, then a machinist, then a wagon maker. The standard American education of a man who was going to build things with his hands. In 1863, still in his 20s, he patented a wooden revolving hay rake. It was a good rake, good enough that Huber went looking for the best timber to build it from, and a brother-in-law told him where to find it: ash and hickory, growing thick around a small county seat called Marion, Ohio. He moved there in 1865. By 1874, after buying out a string of partners, he had a company with his own name on it, the Huber Manufacturing Company.
What followed was not a slow build. It was an explosion of invention. In 1875, Huber added threshing machines to the catalog. In 1877, a portable steam engine to power grain separators. By 1878, a self-propelled steam traction engine, one of the earliest in American agriculture. He patented a return flue boiler design, a system that ran the hot combustion gases back through the boiler a second time before venting them, and he claimed it improved fuel efficiency by 40%. Farmers believed him because it worked, and because a farmer who has to haul his own coal or wood out to a threshing site in October cares about fuel economy in a way no engineer in a design office ever fully understands. Huber was eventually granted around 100 patents in his lifetime, an output that put him closer to a career inventor than a typical factory owner. He co-founded the Marion Steam Shovel Company in 1884 with Henry Barnhart and George King, providing the seed capital that let Barnhart build a better steam shovel, a firm that would later become Marion Power Shovel, builder of some of the largest excavating machines and draglines on Earth. He ran a foundry. He served as president of the Marion National Bank. And a few miles across town, the Marion Manufacturing Company was building a competing line of steam engines and threshers under the Leader name, meaning that for a stretch of the 1880s, a town of barely 12,000 people supported two full-scale steam traction engine and separator manufacturers at once, an arrangement almost unheard of in American agricultural manufacturing. By the time Edward Huber died in 1904 at 67, Huber Manufacturing had built well over 11,000 steam engines, a production run trailing only the McCormick Works in the sheer scale of American agricultural manufacturing. He didn't live to see the company move into gasoline power in any serious way. In 1898, Huber had purchased the rights to a gas tractor design from Van Dusen and built 30 prototype machines, but the results disappointed everyone involved, and the company retreated back to steam for over a decade. It would take until 1911, 7 years after the founder's death, for Huber to try gasoline tractors again in earnest. And that gap matters, because it meant Huber entered the 20th century tractor race late, already playing catch-up to companies that hadn't wasted a decade retreating from a bad first attempt. Marion, meanwhile, had become something unusual, a town of barely 12,000 people that hosted two competing steam engine and thresher builders at once, Huber and the Marion Manufacturing Company's Leader line, standing almost across the street from each other. For a farmer in central Ohio in 1895, that corner of Marion was the center of the agricultural universe. Every fallen brand story likes a clean signature color. The orange that meant Allis Chalmers, the red that meant Farmall. Huber never had one, and that's worth sitting with, because it tells you something true about the company. Early Huber tractors left the factory in green,
Collectors today argue for hours over whether it ran closer to olive drab or a deeper hunter green, because the paint contracts changed suppliers more than once, and nobody wrote down the formula. In 1935, in the teeth of the Depression, Huber built a run of tractors sold through the Farm Bureau's Co-op brand, painted red, not green, because that's what the buyer wanted. Decades later, when Huber's motor graders and rollers were rolling off a different line for road departments instead of farms, they went out in yellow or orange, depending on who was asking and what year it was.
A company with one color has an identity. A company that repaints itself for every buyer is telling you, without meaning to, that it never fully decided what it was. Huber was a hay rake company, then a steam engine company, then a tractor company, then a road equipment company, and it kept the name through every reinvention, but it never kept the color. That instability is the real thread running through this whole story.
If Huber has a golden model, it isn't one machine, it's a family. The company's first genuinely successful farm tractor was the Light 4 1225, built from 1917 to 1927. A cross-motor machine with a Waukesha engine and high front wheels that gave it steering advantages over the clumsier designs of the era. For a prairie farmer who needed something bigger, Huber built a monster, the 3060, later re-rated as a 3570, with rear wheels 8 feet tall and a radiator that held 90 gallons of water, built for exactly the kind of vast, thirsty wheat country that eastern Ohio never had to worry about.
Between those two came Huber's real entry into the modern gasoline tractor business, the 1912 redesign of what the company had first called the farmer's tractor, now built with the engine up front and the operator at the rear like a proper modern tractor, using a Stins-Wallen engine and rated a 1530. Then, starting in 1921, a Super 4 1530 arrived, using a 4-cylinder Midwest engine mounted crosswise in the frame. By 1925, that same Super 4 line had been reclassified as an 1836, and a companion Master 4 2040 joined it, powered by a Hinckley engine. None of those particular 1925 machines are known to survive today, a detail collectors bring up with real sadness, because it means an entire model year effectively vanished from the historical record, existing now only in old advertising and Nebraska test paperwork.
But the era that best represents Huber at its engineering peak came in 1926, when the company redesigned its tractors around a unit frame chassis and a 4-cylinder Stearns engine, offered in 3 sizes, the 1836, the 2040, and the 2550. When these machines went through independent testing at the University of Nebraska, the gold standard of tractor honesty in that era, the place where manufacturers' horsepower claims either held up or didn't, all 3 came back rated higher than advertised. The 1836 was re-rated a 2139. The 2040, running a Stearns DU engine with a 5 1/8 by 6 1/2 inch bore and stroke, became a 3245. And the 2550, powered by a Stearns EU engine with a bore and stroke of 5 1/2 by 6 1/2 inches, came back tested at 40 horsepower on the drawbar and 62 on the belt. The machine collectors still refer to simply as the Huber 4062. That's not a small thing. A tractor that beats its own sales brochure at Nebraska is a tractor built by people who weren't lying to farmers. In an industry that has never been short on exaggerated horsepower claims, Huber's Super 4 line quietly outperformed its own advertising. In 1929, Huber went a step further and cut nearly 2,000 pounds off that same platform, dropping the heavy unit frame construction in favor of a lighter design built around a Waukesha engine, a sign of a company still willing to redesign a good tractor rather than simply keep selling it unchanged. That's the kind of detail that earns loyalty that outlasts a company. What happened to Huber next wasn't a single bad decade. It was a decision the company made about itself, twice, once by choice, once by force. And the first time, nobody outside Marion even noticed. Here is the detail that separates Huber from every other name in this genre. The company didn't lose the farm tractor business to competition or bankruptcy. It walked away from it on purpose. After the Second World War,
Huber made a strategic choice to concentrate on road building and maintenance equipment. Graders, rollers, compactors, and abandoned farm tractors and agricultural machinery almost entirely. There was no farm crisis behind that decision. There was no hostile takeover. The post-war highway boom looked like a better bet than the farm tractor market, which by then was dominated by International Harvester, John Deere, Alice Chalmers, and Case, all of them building bigger dealer networks than Huber ever had. So Huber picked a lane and left agriculture behind.
This is the part of the story that doesn't fit the template this genre usually follows. There was no dramatic farm crisis villain for Huber's tractor line. The company simply decided, sometime in the years after 1945, that it would rather be a road equipment company than a tractor company. And for the farmers who had grown up around that green paint, that was its own kind of quiet loss. The machines that had once been sold in every state east of the Rockies and into central Canada simply stopped being built. No factory floor emptied all at once. The catalog just got thinner, year by year, until the tractors weren't in it anymore. But leaving agriculture didn't save the company. It only changed the shape of the ending. Because a corporation was coming for Marion, whether Huber built tractors or not. By the late 1960s, Huber Manufacturing, now purely a road equipment maker, having left tractors behind 2 decades earlier, had become a target rather than a competitor. This was the era of the American conglomerate, when companies like ATO Inc. built empires not by inventing anything themselves, but by acquiring firms with strong names and long histories, and folding them into a portfolio alongside completely unrelated businesses. In 1969, ATO acquired Huber. This is where the story stops being about farm economics and starts being about what happens to a 100-year-old family manufacturer once it becomes a line item on someone else's balance sheet. ATO moved Huber production out of Marion to Charleston, South Carolina, a decision that had nothing to do with the machines and everything to do with labor costs and corporate consolidation, the same force that hollowed out manufacturing towns across the entire Midwest in that era. For the workers left behind on West Center Street, the message was blunt. The equipment could be built anywhere. The town that invented it wasn't required anymore. A name that had meant Made in Marion since 1874 no longer meant that at all. ATO held on for 15 years. In 1984, it terminated all Huber manufacturing outright. Not a bankruptcy, not a headline-making collapse, just a conglomerate quietly closing a division that no longer justified its place in the portfolio. The Huber name would resurface later, sold to Enterprise Fabricators in the 1990s, relocated again to Galion, Ohio, kept alive in a diminished form building motor graders under the Maintainer name into the early 2000s, changing hands again after that, and licensed out even further from anything Edward Huber would have recognized. But 1984 is the year the thing that had actually been Huber, the company built by one man's own hands, run from his own town, carrying his own risk, stopped existing in any form its founder would have recognized. A name can survive its company by decades. It rarely means the company is still there. The corner of West Center and Leader is still there today. What's not there anymore is nearly 4,000 of Marion's own people. Marion, Ohio peaked at 38,648 residents in 1970, right at the edge of the era when its manufacturing base, Huber included, still meant something. By the 2020 census, the city held 35,999 people, and more recent estimates put it slightly lower still, hovering around 35,500. It's a decline of roughly 7% over half a century, in a city whose entire economic identity, alongside neighbors like Marion Power Shovel and the Marion Steam Shovel Works, had been built on the assumption that heavy manufacturing would stay local forever. That assumption died slowly enough that no single year gets blamed for it. Which, in a way, is the most honest thing that can be said about Marion. It wasn't destroyed in one blow the way some factory towns were. It was gradual. Drive that corner of West Center and Leader today, and the built landscape has mostly moved on.
The foundries and machine shops that once employed thousands are gone or repurposed. What's left is the same story so many Rust Belt County seats carry: a downtown built for a population that manufacturing once justified, now serving a population that manufacturing no longer employs in anything like the same numbers.
And yet, the machines didn't leave when the company did. That's the part of this genre that never fails to move an audience that lived it. The knowledge outlived the corporation. Go looking today, and you'll find Huber steam traction engines and Super 4 tractors still being run, restored, and argued about in exactly the kind of places this audience already knows. Forums like Smokestack and Yesterday's Tractors, where owners compare serial numbers stamped into transmission housings, cross-reference Nebraska tractor test numbers to figure out whether a machine is really a 2040 or a 4062, and debate, decades later, exactly what shade of green left the factory before 1928. Steam shows across the Midwest still put Huber traction engines through their paces every summer, boilers fired the same way they were a century ago. None of that required Huber manufacturing to still exist. It only required people who cared enough to keep asking questions about machines the company itself stopped answering for.
Most brands in this genre have one funeral. Huber had a slow one, spread across 60 years, and that might be the truer story of American manufacturing than any single dramatic collapse. The tractors went first, given up voluntarily in favor of a market that seemed safer. Then the company itself went, absorbed into a conglomerate that valued the name more than the town it came from. Then the town felt it. Not all at once, but the way a slow leak empties a tire. Still round, still recognizable, just not what it was.
Edward Huber built a company on the idea that a man could invent something in his own workshop and sell it to his own neighbors. By the time the name finally stopped meaning anything, that idea itself was mostly gone, not just from Marion, but from the whole landscape of American manufacturing towns that had once assumed their factories belonged to them. The machine and the maker went down together, not in 1 year, in 100 small ones. If your family ever ran a green Huber or a red co-op tractor that started life the same way, you already know that some collapses don't come with a headline. The next story is one you'll want to hear.